Hi, this is Darachek, and this is a special episode of my CO₂-free podcast, the podcast where we are defining climate change topic by topic, discussing ways to reduce our environmental impact, and learning how to adapt to the changing environment. Today we will learn about the Extinction Rebellion movement. There is a version of this episode in the Russian language with a Russian activist, but this episode will focus more on the activists based in Europe. I'm pretty sure most of you have heard about these disrupting groups of activists blocking the roads and subways in order to get arrested and bring visibility. Knowing how social media portrays them, if you never read about Extinction Rebellion movement in the independent sources, you know only half of the story. I want to give you a chance to listen to another part of it by immersing yourself into our conversation with the real participants and hearing out the true reasons why people rebel for the climate and sometimes sacrifice their freedom for it.
People gonna rise like the water, gonna shut the system down. Hear the voice of my great granddaughter saying climate justice now. People gonna rise like the water, gonna shut the system down. Hear the voice of my great granddaughter saying climate justice now.
So let's start from the very beginning. What is XR and why it happened to be at the center of the media's attention this year? Well, as the name tells us, they rebel to give voices to the ones that are being extinct. Extinction Rebellion is an international movement that uses non-violent civil disobedience in an attempt to halt mass extinction and minimize the risk of social collapse. You will hear this non-violent civil disobedience a lot in this podcast. So first I would like to break it down a bit for you guys. Non-violent civil disobedience can take a form of peaceful protests or non-violent resistance. In using these methods, people refuse to do what they are expected or even required to do, or in opposite, they do unexpected or what they are forbidden to do. For example, they can perform a dying scene in the middle of a square where everyone is lying down on the ground as if they're dead. In essence, people turn to nonviolent direct actions after the institutionalized ways of settling disagreements are unsuccessful. This movement is spreading around the world, and right now there is at least one person in every 160 countries. During the conversation, you will hear more on that. Shortly, in every country they have their own demands, but overall they ask for transparency from the government, immediate actions, declaration of emergency that we are actually in, and bringing more fair tools for the decision-making process. Throughout the following conversation, we will talk about why people join XR movement, what do they do, and how they create a community in their movement. So I hope it will bring some inspiration and better understanding of the actions of Extinction Rebellion movement. So hello everyone. Today's kind of non-traditional podcast. I feel quite excited because it's my first podcast in English and with two amazing guests. So let's give some of the background where we are, guys.
Yeah. So right now we're in Spain, in Los Portales. It's an eco-village close to the city of Sevilla, and we're doing this course on how to learn like young people about sustainability in eco-villages or in other practices. So it's really really inspiring moment, and it's a beautiful place to be right now.
How to empower youth to use their emotions, anger and grief, and turn it into something practical, something
empowerment. Basically, it's all about how to use experiential activities, games, and workshops to empower young people to take a bold step.
Yeah. So you heard three voices. One is mine and two others of my guests. So I'll give you a chance, guys, to introduce yourself.
Okay. So my name is Pepijn. You can call me Pep. I'm from the Netherlands, and in the past year, I've been active as part of Extinction Rebellion in the Netherlands, and I've been active in different actions and blockades we did around the country. And besides that, I try to inspire youth with on the topic of sustainability. That's why I'm here right now.
Cool.
My name is Alisa, and in general, I work with the European Network of Community-led Initiatives on Sustainable Development and Climate Change, which is the initiative set in Brussels to bring together movements of permaculture, transition town, and ecovillages to work together for the policy change and also for the exchange of information between ecovillages. But I also have my roots in very international ecovillage and activist hub in Sweden, on the island of Gotland, called Suderbeam, and actually Dasha was there in our place. This is a platform for me to learn a lot about how youth react and interact, and how we can also turn our desperation into real concrete steps for the solutions, be it whatever future we basically face. Yeah, and I'm really happy to be here, and it's, as said, it's really inspiring surrounding. Maybe to add, we're now sitting in a small ecological house built only with natural materials. Our energy comes 100% from local wind and energy built by the community from scratch by their own hands. The water cycle is local, and the food is grown in the garden nearby the house where we're sitting. And it's pretty inspiring to see how much action there is possible to do if you just step out of our desperation and start working towards a better world.
That's true. It's truly inspirational place. I'm taking a lot from it. And also, I really wanted to have this discussion with you guys because I know that you are quite experienced and quite curious-minded about this topic. So, first question that I always ask my guests is, what is climate change for you?
Well, I can operate with the definition of one of the planetary boundaries, even though climate change is not the only one, but it's one of those planetary boundaries defined as one we have exceeded. So for those who maybe haven't heard about it, I think it was around already maybe 10 years ago when a group of scientists led by Stockholm Resilience Center defined different planetary boundaries, which also include biodiversity laws and the laws of the nutrient cycle on the planet and ocean acidification and so on. So out of 12 planetary boundaries, a number of them have been already exceeded, and climate change is on the edge. After that, the situation has gone further, and 4 years ago, there was a Paris Agreement when actually the governments agreed to make very bold steps to reduce the carbon emissions, even though the climate change is caused more than just carbon emissions. There are many different chain effects. But yeah, answering the question, for me, this is a typical effect caused by human industrial era. And I think I have gone through enough papers and education on climate change to believe, even though it's still a belief, I cannot claim that it is a human-made process, and it definitely exists, even though apparently there are people still around who question it. But I think it's a matter of just reading intergovernmental scientific papers.
Reading enough scientific papers.
I don't know, the question when people say, do you believe in climate change? Do not, it's not a religion or God, and I would love not to believe in it. But it's just an effect of human-made industrial era and typical feedback mechanism. I mean, if you consider Earth as a system, every system has a feedback mechanism. This is one of the definitions of a system. And when you work with a system, you're supposed to look at the feedback mechanism and see what it tells you, and then you change your approach to it. So apparently when we work with the Earth as a system, we somehow completely neglect its feedback mechanism, because we already have now floods and extreme weather events and droughts. Unfortunately, global warming is not the only side of climate change. It's not only like, oh, okay, just gonna be warmer and nice, and we can grow oranges in Scandinavia. It's not like that. It's a much more complicated and unpredictable system. So anyway, we work with the system directly. We interacted with it, and we deplete natural resources. Yet we do not take into account the feedback which it gives back to us. And if we continue on this path, we run not only into depleting resources, we run into extinction not only of other species, which we already run into with the huge biodiversity loss, we also run into extinction of our own species, which is not the first time in human civilizations when the civilization runs into collapse. There have been stories before that, and we're not the first ones.
Yeah, that's why I rather would call it like a climate crisis or a climate emergency, because with the word climate change, you could say, oh yeah, climate's always a bit changing. I think that's also why you changed the title of your podcast. And right now it's so heavily changing that it's really a big crisis, and that we should really act now to not going extinct and have all these bigger world problems. And it's already happening, you know. So yeah.
So we can now switch to our main topic of Extinction Rebellion.
Extinction!
Rebellion!
Extinction!
Rebellion!
Extinction!
Rebellion!
So honestly, I know really little about this movement, but I've seen a lot of posts by Alisa. I also saw that you have on your backpack the motto.
I would say it's way more than that. It's actually the first time in life when I carry on my clothes or backpacks a sign of another movement. I have never done it in my life, maybe except of some teenager ages of writing anarchist signs on on a jeans, something like this. And there is definitely a reason for that.
Yeah, I could see that it's a strong movement and you resonate with it, and I was quite curious, why.
Yeah, for me it is because I'm really scared, you know. It's I sometimes feel a bit depressed of the things that are happening in the world, and I would like to have a group of people to share this with and to take action, because otherwise I would just be inactive, and I want to do something with this. With these feelings of anger and fear, and that's why I joined Extinction Rebellion. And they're also really good as a community to help people with these feelings emotionally. As they are very caring and have a regenerative culture. That's
what we're gonna discuss today. So for you, it's kind of you find your way to express your feelings in the safe space, and probably to feel that you're not alone and you can actually do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's powerful.
I would bring also another perspective, even though I resonate with what Pepijn said right now. There is a teacher, I would say, working with transformative learning a lot, called Joanna Macy. Many people were inspired by her books and exercises. And she said that there are 3 types of change makers which are needed to actually shift the paradigm. One, there's people who actually protest against the current system, showing that it's incomplete or incapable of dealing with the current problems. Second, it's people who actually go and build a new model of how the world can look differently. And third, they're the educators helping to shift from the old paradigm to the new paradigm. And for the last years, I've been belonging more to the community movements where people actually take the action and build their own model of life, decentralized and much more ecologically sustainable, producing their food, producing their energy, creating participatory governance systems, also shifting the focus from consumption to happiness through social interaction and supporting one another, caring for one another. But I would say that creating another model for a more resilient future is not that much helpful if people around continue to live as usual, live business as usual, and do not understand what we are actually running into. We all are educated just to live our life as passengers, like as passive passengers, just running exactly the same model, consuming, not thinking much. We are distracted with so many different things and our also personal problems that we actually have a huge difficulty to recognize and accept the stage in which we are in the global development, in the human development. And the movement of Extinction Rebellion, for me, this is the space not only to express how I feel about it, but it is a space to actually bring more awareness to other people, even though it might be not the most comfortable way sometimes with the civil disobedience tools. But it's actually the way to protest against the completely unfunctional system. Like if you believe that we can continue to use the resources infinitely on a planet with limited resources, it's I don't know where from this mentality came from. I think this is more of a brainwashing from the economic system. But when you join Extinction Rebellion, or when you see it on the streets and you actually pay attention, you might rethink what is happening and what is your role in the society now. You also might recognize, and I think this is one of the biggest steps of the current climate actions, you might recognize that we cannot wait for solutions from the corporate world, because the corporate world is completely dependent on our consumption and us trashing the planet. We cannot trust fully the government neither, because in most cases the government is actually lobbied by this corporate world. The only thing which we can do is to take the responsibility and the power in our society as humans and stop being the supply of investments into the corporate world, trashing the world, and into the governmental system supporting it.
So I think the example with the ecovillage would be really nice, because like you also live in ecovillage, but like if the world around is in the fire and we all breathe the same air, we all taking water, like we share resources, like it's not possible to just run away from society to the ecovillage, or like however people perceive it, and like keep silent when this is happening around. So yeah, I totally relate with you, like why you do what you do.
I think there's like what I hear. There's quite a stereotype of people who live in communities and so-called eco-villages, or whatever the name they use. There's a stereotype of getting away from the system and living your own life more sustainably. But I strongly disagree with this, because there are different types of activism, and one type of activism is going on the streets and actually showing the civil disobedience actions to the ones who hold the power. Another type of activism is, on one hand, actually disrupting the part of the supply chain by going to the communities and building more decentralized local economies and making sure that you are not dependent, or at least not as dependent, on the system which runs the trashing of the planet. And unfortunately, there is this image of a hippie just hiding in the woods and living their own life in a more peaceful way. This is not how I see most of the villages now. Most of the communities, be it transition towns in urban areas or rural neighborhoods, people do take power and create a different world, not only for themselves, but also as a prototype of the world how it could be, both for educational reasons, and they actually host a lot of people coming and learning, the same way how you came to Serbia to see what's possible, even though we're just on the experimental side, but also to be part of this disobedience, like, because if you do not participate in the supply and consumption chain, you also do not obey. So for me, it's part of like a side of activism.
Like I feel like it's another step after building your own community, building like growing your own food and self-sustaining yourself, like you actually want to then like loudly tell about it to the world, and either you go like and do some programs like this EVS programs by which I came to all these opportunities, or like some other programs, but yeah, you need to share it afterwards because like you shouldn't keep it to yourself and give it to the world. So how did the movement generally start? I know that it came from the Britain.
Yeah, so 1.5 year ago, it started in Great Britain, and Roger Hallam is one of the co-founders. They started thinking what makes an successful movement, and then they started to do some research within different civil disobedience movements, and they found out that non-violent direct action is the best method to for change. And that's because of it's non-violent. So you do actually disrupt some places by, for example, blocking the streets or doing like die-ins.
Yeah.
And but you will always stay non-violent. So you would never push a police officer away or anything else. And with non-violence, there like it's the media won't turn against you, as they can see sometimes police becoming violent towards you. And we're just, when we're in a blockade, we're just singing songs, we're discussing with each other, we're actually also telling people why we stand there, why they cannot pass, and what road they maybe could take.
Yeah. So like you actually put thought into where to put yourself so that the ambulance or the police can find a way out. So it's not like totally you just like block the city and everything gets crazy.
Yeah. So one month ago we had this this action worldwide. It was called Rebels Without Borders, and I was participating in Amsterdam, where we were blocking the street in front of the Rijksmuseum. That's the biggest museum in Amsterdam, actually. And we were blocking the street and singing songs and about talking about climate change. So we at two sides we had blocked the road, and in between we made tents and toilets and a circle and to discuss. And we were also telling like the people like why we were there and what way they could go. And also like this is place that's used for sports events like marathons in Amsterdam. So ambulances know where they could go. So in that way, it's not that disruptive that it could cost people's lives or something. Yeah.
You also mentioned these dyings. I think for people who doesn't know it, it's basically when you you can probably describe how it goes.
I can say a few words also. Oh, by the way, when we were doing the introduction, I didn't mention that I'm also XR activist in Sweden.
I think it was obvious.
In Sweden. And there are many different aspects I could speak about, but about die-ins, the idea is that it symbolizes the grief over the extinction of biodiversity which we already lost and also losing currently. So the different techniques which people do, sometimes there's also a bit more dramatized actions with fake blood or something maybe which doesn't look nice from the outside but brings more attention. But a typical die-in, hashtag typical die-in, is basically people for some time, 20 hours, sometimes hours, lay on the street or in some public place with banners, but in a kind of in a shape of kind of death by diversity, which is on one hand completely non-violent, exactly as Pepe said. It doesn't actually cause any disruption as such, but it also, because it's in a public place, it also brings a lot of attention. I can give one example which was quite interesting. on 15th of March in Stockholm, we were starting the blockade of the parliament with 25 minutes dying. When we came just spontaneously from different directions, it was, sunny, touristic day, and then people started to lay down like in the shape of a flower if they would be dying, and of course it was already sort of disruptive action in a way because many people were standing and watching, and there's lots of banners, and they say all the things about climate change, system change, not climate change, and people are reading it and so on. But then we had an amazing opera singer with us, and also a few more people who could sing pretty well. So we started to sing an old funeral song adapted from 17th century, I think, quite complex and really beautiful. And of course, it was causing quite an emotional state also in a way. But the next step after this, we were standing up all the same time, and we had to do the rehearsals and everything, and basically singing one of the most common songs of "People Gonna Rise Like the Waters." We're gonna face this crisis now, and it was powerful. So this sensation of seeing something unconventional, it brings a lot of attention, of course.
Yeah.
But also the whole concept of nonviolent civil disobedience is extremely powerful. The whole historical changes and reformations based just on nonviolent civil disobedience, be it back to Gandhi's times. There's also this famous image of a man standing in China in front of the tank, how do you call it, the row of tanks, and stopping them, just because we're all humans and we relate to each other. And when people on the streets sometimes get angry because of the blockade, which happens all the time, we actually also have people speaking to them and explaining what's happening. And many people get quite compassionate. Of course, there are always those angry citizens whose life got disrupted because they didn't get on time to the evening TV show or something else. Sometimes also important events. I'm sorry, I don't want to undermine people's lives, but in most cases, we have to explain also that we are in a crisis situation, which is coming, and we have to understand that the actions should come now. And we are truly sorry. I'm pretty sure that all XR activists are sorry for disrupting people's life, because we do not aim to disrupt people's life. We aim to reach out to the government to understand that system does not work as it should, and you have to take actions, and also to the citizens that we have to take actions.
And yeah, sometimes we give up our freedom for this cause. It's not that we want to do this. It's more that we feel the necessity to do this, and sometimes we can be arrested for these causes and stay in jail for one night. But yeah, we that's what we do because we see this crisis. Yeah. So.
Can you tell us more about the civil disobedience? Where is the border between like too much and too little?
Too much of what? Too little of what?
Of the action.
You mean more the non-violence, non-violent part? Yeah, there is always this discussion going on within XR if what we do is non-violent, and when we start to calling it violent. So we would never push a police officer, for example. But there was also this discussion of stopping metros from taking me part, and so that's what we were discussing on. If it gets unsafe, for example, then we would consider it violent more. And that could happen in this situation, but I don't know the facts about this because I was not part of it.
I would say there is a difference between non-consensual and non-violent, and sometimes people mix it up. The action must be non-consensual, because if you do something with which people agree, you do not do the disruption of the business as usual. So non-consensual means that you do an action which actually brings attention of citizens, but mainly we aim, of course, to the policymakers and decision makers. It's not about citizens, actually. It's not about somebody switching from plastic toothbrush to bamboo toothbrush. It's not about that. It's about addressing the larger system. So the action cannot be consensual. Like you cannot just stand there with a simple manifestation which nobody pays attention to. People have been doing it for decades, and it should be disruptive. Like if you look back into the big paradigm shifts into women rights movement with suffragists, I'm not sure I pronounced it right. If you look into the slavery abolition and other paradigm shifts, when we actually were capable as a civilization to shift our paradigm completely, it was coming from also many decolonization processes and independences of the countries. They were coming with direct nonviolent action, which is non-consensual. Yet, I cannot give the definition of where is the border between violence and non-violence, but I think we all understand like the concept of physical and verbal violence when you actually attack someone, and XR movement and other climate movements of the today, they do not attack. They disrupt the flow, but they never attack.
You mentioned something about the meetings. So you have community meetings. Like, how's it going? It is a global movement. Like, I imagine that it's hard to organize so many people in many countries. Like, how is the structure organized in this?
Yeah. So the structure is completely decentralized. There's not someone on the top or below. Everyone is structured in horizontal line. So there's different circles, and there's also, of course, different cities where the movement is active, and it's organized in mainly in cities and country-wise. So, for example, in my city, Utrecht, in the Netherlands, we have like many circles where people are working on different parts of the movement. So I'm in the outreach and training circle, but there's also the art circle, or the media circle, or the political strategy circle, and they're all working on their parts. And also we come together sometimes to discuss, okay, what are the next actions that we want to do, and how can we work together with the circles to come up with see the big picture again of what we are doing.
And just to clarify, like, it's kind of like volunteer movement, right? You're not getting paid, like, and then how the economy is organized in your community, because I assume that, well, you need resources. Where they're coming from.
Yeah. There's different organizations that give donations with us. It's mainly brands, for example, that are like trying to promote sustainable choices. And yeah, so we're mainly focused by people, or like funded by the people, by fundraising, and by some organizations that want to promote sustainability.
I would also like to mention a part of the XR organization which impresses me a lot, because before joining the blockades and the movement, I perceived it as much less organized, but I was really impressed by the principles which are embedded in the structure. You're never left alone. Like, the whole movement is very caring. Like, you're always supposed to have your body with whom you always check how you are, and you go into the process together. You have your affiliation group, the smaller group with whom you make decisions together, and then one representative from the affiliation group goes into larger circle discussion. So your opinion is always represented, and you always have those with whom you know each other. Even if you joined for the first time, you come to the action for the very first time, and you will get a body, and you will get an affiliation group.
Yeah, affinity group.
Oh, sorry, affinity group.
Yeah.
And this caring culture, and also having the regen groups which provide like food and drinks during the actions, or you can also come and share your feelings if you're afraid or frustrated. This is amazing. It's not just a bunch of people coming together on the street. It's really well thought through, completely voluntary, and really caring culture. And also, people do not come with this, even though it is a lot about transforming your rage into action. People come with a lot of love. People come with a lot of care, and there's also a lot of grief for what is happening. People take the current state of the planet in a very, very deep state, like in a very deep thinking, like they feel it. We're not acting out of, oh yeah, just disrupt the system. I don't like how the things are. No, it comes from a very deep care for what is happening, and also very deep care for one another. Well, this is what impressed me a lot, and made me feel safe, like really safe.
Yeah, maybe one more thing that I would like to mention is like also the reason why we do that, why we work in this way, is because we feel that the social contract has been broken. Like it's a state's authority is based on its commitment and capacity to ensure the safety of its citizens. Governments should protect their citizens. That's basically what's so important. And right now, it's not happening. We're not protected. We're not. They're not telling the truth. They're not acting. And that's why we say people have the right to revolution when a government is not protecting the well-being and lives of its citizens. And that's very important to me. And that's why we also focus it on our governments. Yeah.
Wow, there are so many insights. Like I was observer from the outside. I was just following it on the media, and I was just I hadn't had the opportunity to ask anyone like what is going on and what is this movement about. But now I can see that it's really like deep thought, thoughtfully built community of people who really like believe in what they do, and that's so powerful.
I would say there's also a very deep philosophical part of it, because you can change things only as you accept the situation, and you can take it also for your personal lives. If you reject and close your eyes to a problem or a part of yourself which is sick, you cannot change it. You have to accept the sickness to be able to deal with it. You have to look at it. You have to look into it and act differently than before. And this main demand, which seems to be just such a first step to recognize the climate, to declare the emergency, it is extremely powerful tool, because when you accept that there is a problem, you can switch to solving it. So far, we are stuck in our illusionary mentality of, oh, they might be a problem, but it's somewhere in the future. This is bullshit. Like, you have to actually face what you're running into on a full speed.
Yeah.
And Extinction Rebellion doesn't demand much. It demands a very first step. Take a look what is happening. Declare the emergency. And then we can figure out how to do it. At least accept the problem. And this is a big problem, like a big question for many people, that we are still just continuing with our business as usual without understanding the situation.
There's quite some demands as well, like 0 carbon emissions in 2050, and so that's also, we also have like strong demands.
I think it's different in different locations, actually.
Okay.
Like different country have their or different regions have their different national or local programs, but there are 3 general demands, like for all XR movements around the globe.
Yeah.
So
declare the climate emergency, tell the truth, and create citizens assemblies to include citizens' opinion into decision making. Yeah. So for everyone who, for some reason, was paying attention, like, oh, there is something happening, but actually not knowing what it is, I do recommend very strongly to come and join the local group for the action, or just, like, weekend manifestation or anything else. Sometimes there are also trainings. I think now XR starts to do more and more trainings. You, Pepe, you said that you also in a training
Yeah.
circle.
I'm doing
how's it
trainings.
happening?
We're doing talks on what is happening and what we do about it. We do trainings about nonviolent direct action. So it's happening everywhere in the world, and you can just join. And maybe I could end with a quote like, when people don't act like there's a crisis, people don't believe that it's a crisis, and that's why we act in this way. And thank you for inviting us. And
I want to add one more thing. I want to add that it's not only about standing on the street. There's so many sides which actually will get. Well, you will get to know people. You will get to know, when you come and join. You will get to know new friends with whom you can share not only frustration about what is happening in the world, or fear of uncertainty of the future. You also can share a lot of values and a lot of positive thoughts too. So it's really empowering just to be with people and finding companions with whom you trust to go further because you have similar concerns and similar values.
With whom you can actually build that
Yeah.
future that
Yeah.
you are manifesting.
Yeah, and so we don't need to speak about how good the weather is or what movie you watched the last night. It's like this is true companionship. This is true community. I might just quickly say that for me, it is coming back to this question of protesting against the current system, showcasing that it's unfunctional in the reality in which we live. But then there is also a step of actually getting out of the burning house when you understand that it's burning, because most people don't understand that your house is burning. You get out and you build a new house. And by the moment when the first house has burned and other people run into you asking like, oh, how do you actually produce your own energy? Oh, how do you actually grow your own food? Oh, how do you actually deal with each other so you can live in a community sharing your resources without killing one another from conflicts? So by that moment, there already has to be a pool of solutions and understandings how to do that. And unfortunately, very few people right now take this step. So for me, this is a really bold step of actually innovating and exploring and experimenting with solutions. And I very strongly encourage also people to take a look into alternatives. But then there are also educators, and this is why we are here for this training, to try to deliver different tools and empower people to work with youth and to explain that, hey, even if the economic system is going to collapse, which sooner or later it will, it's not a big deal. We can build a new world according to the values, and if we have enough compassion to ourselves and to other people and to other species and ecosystem, we actually can make it quite well. Yes, it will be different, but it might be a beautiful other future, even though it will take time to regenerate the soil and ecosystem, and we cannot return back the biodiversity being lost. But still, there are different ways of doing it, and even if we need to face the crisis, there is a hope of doing things differently. So there's a lot of exploration right now going on about it also.
And today we saw a great example of how we actually can use scientific method and scientific data and approach and combine it with the permaculture view and restore the natural environment around us for the better.
Oh yeah, I hope that Dasha will tell more about all this stuff going on here.
Definitely. There is so much inspiration in this place, and thank you for agreeing for this quick conversation. We have really little time between our trainings, but hopefully you can take with you some insights from this conversation. And I know that in Russia the movement is only probably starting to appear, and it's quite turbulent zone in Russia right now to go on the streets and do something like that.
I mean, in Russia you don't have to go into starting an XR branch. You just can go and defend GS or whatever else area which is completely violently taken by the semi-governmental, semi-corporate world, which is pretty much brought together in the country. So I don't know how much effort you would need to put into starting a branch of another organization rather than just going with the communities which already exist.
Yeah, Fridays of Future is quite developing right now. I would say like many people are joining, and yeah, you're also like one of the ways to bring the message out.
Power to the people! Thank you so much.
Yes.
I really enjoyed the questions. Thanks.
And one more time, thank you everyone for joining us today for this important discussion. I hope you enjoyed listening to this special episode. And if you want to read more on Extinction Rebellion movement, follow us, CO₂-free project, on Instagram, where we piece by piece introduce you to the topic of climate change. Let me know what you think about this format in English and if you should develop it on a par with the Russian one. I would be really happy if you rate our podcast in Apple Podcasts or in any other platform where you're listening to ours. And make sure you already checked out our previous episodes on CO₂-freepodcast.com. And remember, climate change is not a reason to panic, but a reason to change.
People gonna rise like the water, gonna shut the system down. Hear the voice of my great-granddaughter saying climate justice now. People gonna rise like the water, gonna shut the system down. Hear the voice of my great-granddaughter saying climate justice now. People gonna rise like the water, gonna shut the system down. Hear the voice of my great-granddaughter saying climate justice now. People gonna rise like the water, gonna shut the system down. Hear the voice of my great-granddaughter saying climate justice now. People gonna